What happens when the one sworn to protect the town becomes the biggest threat to it? Maple Hollow had always been the kind of place people passed through and thought about staying. Nestled between the gentle arms of the Colorado Rockies, it had clean streets, friendly diners, and a kind of neighborly trust that seemed a relic from another time. It was a kind of town where you didn't lock your doors, where everyone knew each other's first name, and secrets rarely stayed buried for long. At the heart of it all stood Sheriff Daniel Whitmore, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes and a slow, confident drawl. Daniel embodied everything Maple Hollow admired. He had been born here, raised by a family of ranchers who taught him early about hard work, loyalty, and justice. After serving the Marines, he came back home, put on the badge, and quickly rose through the ranks. By 34, he was the youngest sheriff the county had ever elected. He wasn't just a law. He was Maple Hollow's pride. To most, Daniel was a loving husband to his high school sweetheart, Claire Whitmore, a woman known for her kindness, active volunteer work, and an infectious laugh that made even the coldest winter days feel a little warmer. They were the town's perfect couple, Claire with her wide, welcoming smile, and Daniel with his steady, calming presence. But perfection is a fragile thing, and beneath the polished veneer of Maple Hollow's favorite son, a storm was brewing, a storm that would tear 3 families apart and leave a permanent scar on the town's soul. The secret that would unravel everything began quietly, almost innocently, as many betrayals do. A lingering glance, a laugh that lasted too long, and then something more, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. It was a Thursday evening in September when everything began to collapse. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the windows of the Whitmore home. Claire, bundled in an oversized sweatshirt, sat curled up on the couch, half watching a rear in a Law and Order while scrolling through her phone. Her own device had been missing all afternoon, and she suspected she'd simply left it in Daniel's patrol truck. Annoyed but not suspicious, she grabbed his phone off the kitchen counter, intended to call her own number and locate it. As she unlocked it, Daniel rarely used a passcode. After all, what did he have to hide? A series of incoming texts flashed across the screen. Her hand froze midair. The messages were unmistakable. Sarah Miller. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Daniel Whitmore. Me neither. Wish I could wake up next to you every morning. Sarah Miller. Maybe someday. If you finally leave her. Claire stared, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the rain anymore. Sarah Miller, the young, vivacious wife of Deputy Kyle Miller. Sarah, who had attended book club meetings at Claire's house. Sarah, who had stood beside her at the town bake sale, laughing and gossiping about other people's scandals. Sarah, who was supposed to be her friend. For a long moment, Claire sat perfectly still, trying to absorb the reality seeping through her like a poison. She wasn't just betrayed by her husband. She had been betrayed by her entire world. Tears blurred her vision as she scrolled further. Pictures, explicit ones. Promises whispered between stolen moments. Plans, fantasies, lies. In that moment, Claire felt the earth beneath her shift. The man she had trusted with her heart, her home, her entire life, was a stranger. But the nightmare was only just beginning, because Claire wasn't the only one to uncover the secret that night. Across town, Deputy Kyle Miller, exhausted after a double shift, had returned home to find Sarah passed out drunk on their couch, her phone unlocked beside her. Curious, and then concerned, Kyle had picked it up, intending to turn it off. What he found detonated his world. Kyle Miller had a temper, always had. But what he felt in that moment wasn't just rage. It was something deeper, blacker, a kind of betrayal that stripped away every boundary, every rule he lived by. And somewhere deep inside, something snapped. The next morning, Maple Hollow woke to fog and a biting chill in the air, a fitting atmosphere for a town that would soon suffocate under the weight of betrayal. Sheriff Daniel Whitmore pulled into the station just after sunrise, running on 2 hours of broken sleep and too much cheap whiskey. He had barely closed the door to his office when Kyle Miller stormed in. Daniel could tell instantly that something was wrong. Kyle's face, usually easygoing and boyish, was twisted into something wild, feral. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw clenched so tightly Daniel could hear the teeth grinding. "We need to talk," Kyle hissed, slamming the door shut behind him. Daniel stood frozen behind his desk. His hand instinctively moved to the sidearm holster on his belt, not out of fear, but reflex. Kyle threw a phone onto Daniel's desk. Sarah's phone. The screen glowed with a damning text thread Daniel knew all too well. "How long?" Kyle demanded, his voice shaking with suppressed violence. Daniel swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. "Kyle, How long?" Kyle roared, grabbing a paperweight off the desk and hurling across the room, where it shattered against the far wall. The noise brought a few curious deputies to the hallway outside, but one hard glare from Daniel sent them scattering. 6 months, Daniel admitted, barely recognizing his own voice. Kyle laughed, a terrible, hollow sound. 6 months, he repeated, shaking his head. 6 goddamn months you've been screwing my wife, my partner, my brother. Daniel tried to explain, tried to say it wasn't planned, that it had just happened, that it didn't mean what Kyle thought it meant. But every word felt more pathetic than the last. Kyle didn't wait to hear it. He turned and left, slamming the door so hard the glass in its window cracked. Daniel sank into his chair, head in his hands. His world was unraveling faster than he could stop it, and he knew, deep down, it was only a matter of time before the whole town knew too. Over the next 2 days, the tension in Maple Hollow became a living, breathing thing. At the diner, hushed conversations died when Daniel walked in. At the grocery store, old ladies gave Claire pitying looks she couldn't understand. And Daniel didn't dare explain. Kyle stopped showing up for shifts altogether. His patrol car sat abandoned in his driveway, collecting dust and suspicion. Claire, meanwhile, moved through the house like a ghost. She didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't confront him. Not in words, at least. Her silence was worse than any accusation. Daniel tried once drunkenly to reach out to Sarah, to beg her to leave town with him before it all exploded. But Sarah refused. She wasn't leaving her kids, her life. She loved Daniel, she said, but not enough to torch everything. Daniel was alone, a king watching his crumbling kingdom from a rapidly shrinking throne. And then came the night of October 17th, the night that would change everything. It started with a text. "Kyle, we need to settle this. Man to man. Meet me at Miller's Creek Cabin. 8 p.m. No one else." Daniel stared at the message for a long time. The old Miller cabin was isolated, abandoned for years after Kyle's father died. No one would hear them there. No one would interrupt. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct screamed that it was a trap. But he couldn't say no. He needed to fix this, or at least control how it ended. He strapped on his service weapon, pulled on his jacket, and drove out into the deepening dusk, the wheels of his patrol truck crunching over gravel roads slick from days of rain. In the distance, the mountain stood dark and unyielding against a bruised sky. Miller's Creek Cabin was little more than a rotting skeleton now, a sagging porch, peeling paint, shattered windows boarded up half-heartedly. Daniel pulled up, headlights slicing through the heavy mist. Kyle's truck was already there. No lights inside. Daniel stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the mud, and approached the door. It was ajar. He pushed it open slowly, hand hovering near his holster. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and mold. A single oil lantern sat on the floor, casting long, jittery shadows. And in the center of the room, Kyle, sitting in a rickety chair, rifle across his lap. "You came," Kyle said without looking up. Daniel swallowed hard. "I'm here. Let's talk." Kyle smiled, a cold, dead thing, and lifted the rifle casually. "Talking's over, Dan." Kyle stood slowly, the rifle hanging loosely in his hands, but very much ready. "You took everything from me," he said, voice trembling with fury. "My wife, my family, my life." Daniel tried to reason with him, hands raised. "It was a mistake," he said hoarsely. "I'm sorry. I should have." "Shut up," Kyle screamed, and for a terrifying moment, Daniel thought he would pull the trigger right then. Kyle paced, voice rising. You think you're untouchable? Huh, because you're the goddamn sheriff. Daniel edged toward the lantern, trying to position himself between Kyle and the exit. I don't want to hurt you, Kyle, he said carefully. Kyle laughed bitterly. It's too late for that. There was a rustling sound outside. Boots on gravel. Both men froze. The door burst open, and there stood Claire and Sarah, both breathless, faces pale with fear. Stop. Sarah cried, stepping between them. Kyle, don't do this. Claire's eyes locked onto Daniel's. There was so much pain there, so much betrayal. He almost dropped his knees right there. Claire, he whispered, but the moment shattered as Kyle roared, raising the rifle. The cabin exploded into chaos. The first shot ripped through the cabin like a thunderclap. Daniel dove to the side, instinct kicking in, drawing his sidearm. Sarah screamed. Claire stumbled backward. Hands pressed to her stomach. Blood blooming like a dark, terrible flower across her white sweater. Claire, Daniel shouted, crawling toward her. Another shot. Kyle, wild-eyed, fired blindly, missing Sarah by inches. Daniel returned fire. The bullet caught Kyle in the shoulder, spinning him around. But he didn't drop, didn't stop. Sarah lunged at Kyle, trying to wrestle the rifle away. There was a struggle, a scream, and another deafening crack. Sarah slumped to the floor, unmoving. Kyle turned to Daniel, grinning with something like triumph even as blood poured from his wound. You lose, he spat. Daniel fired again. This time, the bullet hit Kyle square in the chest. Kyle dropped his weapon, staggered backward, and collapsed. Silence fell, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing and the distant moan of the wind through broken windows. Daniel staggered to Claire's side. She was still breathing, barely. No, no, no. Stay with me, he begged, pressing his hands over her wound, feeling the hot blood pumping between his fingers. I'm sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Then nothing. Her body went still. Daniel sat there for what felt like hours, cradling her against his chest, the weight of his sins crashing down around him. Sarah's body lay crumpled near the doorway, eyes wide open in shock and horror. Kyle's body bled out in the middle of the room, the rifle inches from his outstretched hand. 3 lives gone, all because of him. Outside in the misty darkness, the faint wail of sirens began to rise. Too late to save anyone. When the deputies arrived, the first thing they saw was Daniel, kneeling in the mud outside the cabin. His uniform was soaked in blood. His badge hung crookedly from his chest. He raised his empty hands when they shouted, offering no resistance. Behind him, the open door framed a scene out of a nightmare. 3 bodies lying sprawled in grotesque stillness, blood pooling across the warped floorboards. Deputy Morgan, Daniel's second in command, stumbled back and vomited in the grass. Nobody moved for a long time. Nobody knew what the hell to do. Finally, 2 deputies approached Daniel slowly, guns drawn. You need to come with us, Sheriff, Morgan said, voice cracking. Daniel just nodded. His face was blank, almost serene, as they handcuffed him and read him his rights, the same rights he had read to countless criminals over the years. But Daniel wasn't just another criminal. He was their sheriff. And now he was something far worse. The holding cell at the Maple Hollow station was freezing. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sickly shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. Daniel sat at the metal table, hands cuffed in front of him, staring blankly at the wall. An untouched cup of coffee sat cooling beside him. Across from him, Detective Linda Hargrove, called in from the State Bureau, watched it with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. You want to tell me what happened? She asked softly. For a long time, Daniel said nothing, just sat there, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. I killed them, he said flatly. All of them. Daniel's voice broke on the next words. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean for Claire to. He stopped, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes until the cuffs rattled. Detective Hargrove leaned forward. Walk me through it. Daniel did. He told her everything. The affair, the confrontation, the chaos, the blood, the screams, the final, fatal shots. When he finished, The room was heavy with silence. "I never meant for it to happen," he whispered. "I just wanted to fix it. I thought, maybe if I could just explain." His voice trailed off, hollow. Detective Hargrove scribbled a few notes but didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. Nothing was going to undo what had been done. Over the next few days, the town of Maple Hollow turned into something unrecognizable. The news spread faster than wildfire. The Golden Boy Sheriff, the affair, the triple homicide. Everyone had an opinion. Some said Daniel was a monster who had orchestrated the whole thing. Others said he had been driven mad by guilt, trapped by mistakes he couldn't escape. The funerals came in quick succession. Claire's service was the most heavily attended. Old women wept openly. Children clutched at their mother's skirts. The mayor spoke in a trembling voice about trust and tragedy, but the words fell hollow. Sarah's funeral was quieter, sadder somehow. The town didn't know how to grieve her. She had been both victim and betrayer, and the people of Maple Hollow didn't forgive easily. Kyle's funeral was angry. Law enforcement officers from 3 counties lined up to pay their respects to a fallen brother. No one mentioned his crimes, only his service. Daniel was not allowed to attend any of the funerals. He sat alone in his cell, listening to the distant sounds of life carrying on without him. He dreamed of blood and screaming in Claire's tear-filled eyes. He would carry the weight of his badge and everything it had cost for the rest of his life. By January, Maple Hollow no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene preserved in amber, frozen under the cold scrutiny of cameras, reporters, and strangers hungry for blood. The trial of Sheriff Daniel Whitmore was moved to a neighboring county to avoid prejudice. But the stink of betrayal was impossible to escape. Everyone in the state knew his name now. Everyone had an opinion. The courtroom buzzed with tension the day it all began. Reporters filled the benches, clicking away with their cameras as Daniel was led inside in a faded orange jumpsuit, wrists and ankles shackled. He didn't look like a sheriff anymore. He looked like a ghost. Gaunt, haunted, completely alone. The prosecution painted him as a manipulative man who had used his position to cover up his affair until it erupted in violence. Daniel Whitmore was not a victim. The district attorney thundered. He was a coward who refused to face the consequences of his actions, and in the end, 3 innocent people paid for his sins. The defense, meanwhile, tried to argue that the shooting had been an act of panic, a confrontation spiraling out of control. They pointed out Kyle's rage, the rifle, the isolation of the cabin. But Sheriff Whitmore was no ordinary man. The defense attorney said solemnly, he was a trained law enforcement officer. He should have de-escalated. He should have called for backup. He didn't. The jurors sat stone-faced throughout it all, absorbing every gruesome detail. The affair, the texts, the final, fatal shots. Daniel himself sat motionless. He never cried. He never pleaded. When he took the stand in his own defense, his voice was hoarse but steady. "I made mistakes," he said. "I betrayed my wife. I betrayed my town. But I never meant to kill her. I never meant for any of them to die." For a brief moment, something flickered in the courtroom. Sympathy, maybe, but it wasn't enough. The truth was too ugly to forgive. It took the jury less than 5 hours to reach a decision. The courtroom was deathly silent when the foreman rose, hands trembling slightly as he unfolded the slip of paper. "We find the defendant, Daniel Whitmore, guilty of second-degree murder in the deaths of Claire Whitmore, Sarah Miller, and Kyle Miller." Daniel closed his eyes. There was no outburst, no weeping, just a quiet, devastating finality. The judge, an old man with tired eyes, looked down at Daniel with something almost like pity. "You were sworn to protect and serve," he said gravely. "Instead, you brought death and destruction to the very people who trusted you most." He sentenced Daniel Whitmore to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. It was over, or at least the official part was. Daniel was transferred to the state penitentiary within days. Inside those concrete walls, he was just another broken man, another prisoner. No badge, no honor, no name that mattered. The town of Maple Hollow tried to rebuild, tried to forget. A new sheriff was elected, a hard-nosed woman from the city who made it her mission to restore trust in the department. Claire's family moved away within months, unable to bear the memories. Sarah's children were sent to live with relatives 2 states over. And Kyle Miller became something of a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered among rookie deputies who still believed in the old codes of loyalty and brotherhood. As for Daniel, he spent his days in a small gray cell, staring at the cracked ceiling, reliving every mistake over and over. He never appealed his conviction. In some ways, prison was easier than freedom had ever been. There were no choices to make anymore, no one to betray, only silence and regret. What would you have done if you found out your spouse's affair led to a massacre? Would you forgive? Would you explode? Would you spiral the way Daniel did, down a path soaked in guilt, betrayal, and blood? 3 lives were lost that night in the cabin. A wife, a lover, a friend, and a town was left bleeding from wounds it didn't know it had. Some say Daniel Whitmore was a monster. Others say he was a man broken by his own lies. But one thing is certain, power, when paired with deceit, is deadly. So what do you think? Was Daniel a victim of a tragic chain of events? Or was he just another man who thought he could control the damage he caused? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this story if it left you questioning the truth behind the people we trust most. Because in the end, sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from the criminals on the street. It comes from the badge on your chest.